Today we're going to talk about the never-ending battle between what is an expression and what is an equation. These are two vocabulary words that you need to learn. One, we've already worked on in class for the past week. It's called an expression. An expression is simply made up of numbers and letters. For instance, 3x plus 2x minus 1. And it does not have an equal sign. Does not have an equal sign. The only thing you can do with an expression is simplify the expression. This expression, 3x plus 2x minus 1, simplifies to be 5x minus 1. You cannot solve an expression because there is no equal sign. Which brings me to what is an equation. An equation is something that has an equal sign. You see the word equal inside this word equation. It has an equal sign. For instance, x plus 5 equals 10. Now I know we can all see that when x plus 5 equals 10, you probably know that inside this x has to be the number 5. Because that's the only way that x plus 5 can equal 10. You can't have any other number there. If it was 6 or 7 or 8 or 1 or 2, it wouldn't equal 10. So x in this case has to equal 5. Now how do we solve it if it gets a little more complex? Let's find out. We have certain steps that we need to follow in order to solve an equation. This equation is pretty simple, but when they get more complicated, you're going to want to know these steps. So I'm going to need you to write these down. What if I have an addition problem like x plus 5? I'm simply going to take the number that's on the side of the equation with the variable, and I'm going to do the opposite operation. I see a plus, so therefore I'm going to use a minus. I'm going to use the same number, so in this case I'm going to subtract 5. I have 5, I'm going to subtract 5. There are certain rules I must follow. What I do to one side of the equation, for instance the left side here, I must do to the other side. If I subtracted 5 here, I must also subtract 5 here. When I find out what they equal, 5 minus 5 equals, that's right, you said it, it equals 0. Doesn't exist. $0, 0. It is no longer there, I got rid of it. As you can see, there is only an x left on this side. And therefore x equals whatever 10 minus 5 is, and it equals 5. That seems pretty simple. What happens if my equation is a subtraction problem, like x minus 3 equals 6? Again, I have a left side and a right side. Here's my left side, and here's my right side. Okay, what I do to the left side, I must also do to the right side. And the object is to get this x all by itself on the left side. I can see that the minus 3 is in my way. How do I get rid of a minus 3? Well, we should all know that in order to get this to equal 0, because 0 makes it go away, I have a minus 3. What if I do the opposite, which is plus 3? Negative 3 plus 3 equals, that's right, you said it, it equals 0. 6 plus 3 equals 9. So therefore x, which is all by itself now, equals 9. Remember, what I did to one side, I also had to do to the other. Notice that they say the exact same thing on both sides. One says plus 3 over here, it says plus 3 over here. If I was to subtract a certain amount here, I would have to subtract a certain amount here. The theme is you must treat both sides equally. So that covers addition and subtraction. What about multiplication? What if my problem was a multiplication problem, such as 2x equals 6? Now we know that 2 and an x means multiplication. 2 times a number. 2 times x. 2 times something equals 6. Well, I know you're saying to yourself, well, that has to be 3, right? Because 2 times 3 equals 6. Duh. Well, let's find out how we can make sure that it's 3 in case we get a bigger equation. What we need to do is take the multiplication and use division. Because the opposite of multiplication is, that's right, it is division. I'm going to divide by this number right here. We call this number a coefficient. That's going to be an important vocabulary word later. It's called a coefficient. The coefficient is the number that's attached to the variable. In this case, the coefficient is 2. So we're going to divide by the coefficient of 2. I know you're saying to yourself, hey, what I do to the left side, I must also do to the right side. So if I divided the left side by 2, I must divide the right side by 2. What is 2 divided by 2? That's right, it's 1. Yep, 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1, and then you have that x there still, because we didn't want to get rid of it, we just wanted to make it by itself. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. And what did we say the answer was before? We said it was going to be 3. What does this 1x mean right here? Well, how many x's are there? There's 1. So like I said in class before, instead of just writing 1x, we could just save ourselves some time and write x, because there's only 1. The only other reason we need to write a number with that x is if there is more than 1, but in this case there's only 1. So we're just going to erase that little 1 right there, because it's just redundant, and just make it x equals 3. Last problem. What if my problem was division? Well, you said it. The opposite of division is multiplication. So, here's my division problem. It says x divided by 2. Remember that the fraction is simply a division. This is a division sign. X divided by 2. Well, the opposite of division is multiplication. So let's think about this. If I'm using these numbers that are over here already, I'm going to multiply this side by, that's right, by 2. And what I do to one side, I must also do to the other. So if I multiply this by 2, because that's what's down here, I'm going to multiply this by 2. Well, another way to write 2 is 2 over 1, because 2 divided by 1 is, that's right, it's 2. We should have known that by now. That any way you write a whole number is to put it over 1. And when you multiply fractions, you multiply straight across. Alright, so we're going to multiply this straight across. 2 times x gives me 2x. That's over 1 times 2, which gives me 2. And looky there. 2 divided by 2 is what? That's right, it's 1. 1, and then you have an x. But what did we learn last time? We learned that we didn't need to write that 1, so I'm just going to go ahead and erase it right here. And I have x all by itself on the left side. What does x equal? Well, let's go back over here and say that we did 2 times 2 equals 4. X equals 4 in this problem. Let's check our work just to make sure. If I take this 4 right here and plug it in right here instead of an x, every time I see an x I put a 4. Well, now I have 4 divided by 2. And what is 4 divided by 2? Oh yeah, it's 2. So that means that my answer is correct. It has to be 4 that x equals. So let's review real quick. I have covered the difference between an expression and an equation. Remember that an expression does not have an equal sign. And when it does not have an equal sign, we cannot solve it. Then we covered solving certain equations, like an addition problem, x plus 5. We used the opposite number, which was minus 5. We plus 5, the opposite is minus 5. And what we do to one side, we must do to the other. Then we moved on to a subtraction problem, x minus 3. And the opposite of minus 3 is plus 3. So what we did to one side, we had to do to the other. Added 3 to both sides. Got 9. Finally, we did multiplication. And it was 2 times x equals 6. So the opposite of multiplication was division. So we divided by 2 that's right, on both sides. Because what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. Alright, 6 divided by 2 was 3. And then lastly, we had a division problem, x divided by 2. And to solve division, we used the opposite, which was multiplication. So if I divide by 2, I must multiply by 2 to get my answer. That's why we multiplied by 2. I hope you've learned something about solving equations. And I also hope that if you did not get everything the first time, that you hit that little rewind button on your browser and watch the video again. When you come into class the next day, I fully expect you to be able to solve any of those 4 types of problems. They're not going to get any harder than that as long as you understand what we just did. Hope you have a good night. See you in class.